There's a specific sound that lives rent-free in the memory of anyone raised by Asian parents. The soft shuffle of slippers on a hard floor, the distant clatter of a rice cooker, the smell of something simmering on the stove at 6 in the morning. If you grew up in that house, you already know. You didn't just hear those sounds, you felt them. They were the language of a household that loved you deeply but rarely said so out loud. I'm going to walk you through 12 specific things you'll only recognize if you lived it, and the last one is going to hit you harder than you expect. Stay with me. Let's start at the front door, because the front door is sacred. You knew this before you could tie your shoes. You took them off every single time. No exceptions, no guests were exempt. No matter how fancy the occasion, shoes stayed outside or in the entryway. Full stop. And if you ever forgot, even once, you felt that silence. Not yelling, not a lecture, just a look. That look, the one that said everything without saying a single word. Western households sometimes have a shoes off preference. In your house, it wasn't a preference, it was law. And speaking of unspoken laws, the slipper. If you were raised by Asian parents, you know the slipper was never just footwear, it was a warning system, it was diplomacy. It was the last thing standing between you and consequences you didn't want to think about. Most of the time, it was never actually used. It didn't need to be. The possibility was enough. Your parent would look down, then look at you, then back down, and suddenly whatever you were doing stopped immediately. No yelling required, no negotiation, just the slipper, doing its quiet, powerful work. There was also a specific grammar you learned without being taught, the grammar of permission and refusal. You didn't ask, "Can I go out?" You already knew the answer involved a list of questions back. Where are you going? Who will be there? When will you be home? What about your homework? Have you eaten? The interrogation wasn't interrogation, it was care wrapped in skepticism. Your parents had learned that the world was harder than they wanted it to be, and they weren't about to let you walk into it unprepared. You learned to anticipate these questions. You learned to have answers ready before you asked. You learned that going out wasn't simple, it was a negotiation with someone who loved you enough to make sure you thought things through. Now let's talk about food, because food wasn't just food, it was the whole emotional vocabulary of your childhood. Your parent didn't say, "I love you," the way other parents did. Not out loud, not with those exact words, but they woke up early to pack your lunch. They saved the best piece of chicken for your bowl. They cut fruit and left it on the table without saying anything. A plate of sliced mango, a bowl of oranges already peeled. That was the love language. Dense, practical, undeniable. And if you didn't eat enough, you heard about it. If you left food on your plate, you heard about it. Food was never casual. Food was care made visible. Here's something you probably recognized early. Whenever you got sick, no one called the doctor first. Your parent pressed the back of their hand to your forehead, then your cheek, then your neck. That hand was the diagnostic tool. It was faster than a thermometer and somehow more authoritative. And then came the remedies: hot soup, ginger tea, something boiled with ingredients you couldn't identify but trusted completely. Western medicine was always the backup plan. Home medicine came first. And honestly, it usually worked. There was also the financial reality your parents never fully explained, but you understood anyway. Money was tight. Maybe it wasn't obvious at first. Maybe it took years to understand why your parents wore the same jacket for 5 winters, why they drove a car held together with determination and duct tape, why certain conversations happened behind closed doors, hushed and tense. But you learned not to ask for things casually. You learned that wanting something and getting it were two entirely different matters. Every dollar they didn't spend on themselves was a dollar they could spend on your education, your future, your possibilities. You absorbed that lesson without needing it spelled out. It became part of how you valued things. Nothing was frivolous. Everything mattered. Let's talk about school. Because school was not just school. School was everything. Your grades weren't just your grades. They were a reflection of the whole family, of every sacrifice your parents had made, every late shift, every skipped vacation, every year of grinding just to give you a chance. You felt that weight. Maybe you didn't have words for it as a kid, but you understood it. When you brought home a 92, the first question wasn't "great job." It was what happened to the other 8 points. That wasn't cruelty. That was a specific kind of love. A love that believed you were capable of more, always. And then there was the comparison. Oh, the comparison. Do you remember the neighbor's kid? The cousin who got into a top university? The friend of the family whose child became a doctor at 27? You heard about them constantly, not to hurt you, not to diminish you, but because in your parents' mind, pointing to someone's success was pointing toward a door they wanted you to walk through. It wasn't, you're not good enough. It was, look what's possible. The delivery was rough sometimes, the intention was never small. Respect for elders wasn't a lesson you were taught once, it was built into every single interaction from the time you could speak. You used the right titles. You didn't talk back. You didn't sit while older people stood. You didn't start eating until everyone was seated. You greeted every adult properly, and if you ever slipped up in public, the correction came fast and quiet and thorough. Not as punishment, as training. Because your parents understood something deeply. How you treat people older than you says everything about your character. That belief got wired into you early. It never left. Now, the saving. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Nothing got thrown away. Plastic bags from the grocery store, folded and stored in a drawer stuffed with other plastic bags. Takeout containers, washed and stacked in a cabinet. The good plates, reserved for guests who sometimes never came. Rubber bands collected in a bowl near the kitchen, empty glass jars repurposed for something. Everything had a second life. Your parents had lived through times when nothing was guaranteed. So nothing got wasted. Not a bag, not a container, not a single grain of rice at the bottom of the bowl. The silent treatment was its own advanced form of communication. When you really crossed a line, there was no explosion, no dramatic confrontation. Just quiet. Your parent went about their business. Cooking, cleaning, watching the news, and you existed in the cold orbit of that silence, waiting for it to lift. It was more effective than any punishment because the silence made you think. It made you reflect. You replayed your choices. You figured out on your own what you did wrong, and when the silence finally broke, it broke gently. A question about dinner. A cup of tea placed on your desk. That was the apology. That was the reconciliation. No words needed. What you maybe couldn't see then but can see clearly now is what all of it added up to. The strict expectations, the unspoken love, the saved plastic bags, the slipper, the cut fruit left quietly on the table. It built something in you, a tolerance for difficulty that most people have to learn the hard way as adults. A respect for effort, a belief that hard work is not optional, it's just what you do. A comfort with silence, a deep understanding that love doesn't always come with a speech. Sometimes it comes with a bowl of soup at midnight when you didn't even know someone noticed you were struggling. You were raised in a household where actions carried more weight than words. And whether you knew it or not, that shaped how you show up in the world. There's a particular feeling that hits when you're an adult and you call home and your parent asks immediately whether you've eaten. Not how are you, not how was your day. Have you eaten? And in that moment, all of it comes back. The rice cooker, the slipper, the silent look across the room, the fruit on the table, the relentless belief that you could be better. You weren't raised with a lot of soft words, but you were raised with something just as real. A love that showed up every single day in every small and practical and stubborn way it knew how.